The drilling stopped at exactly 300 meters below the surface. Hana Kim wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at the readout on her scanner. After 6 months of digging through the crystal formations of Kethvar, they had finally found something that was not rock or metal ore. "Dr. Kim, you need to see this," called out Dong-Ho Park, the security chief. His voice carried a mix of excitement and worry that made Hana's stomach tighten. In 20 years of archaeological work, she had learned that tone usually meant trouble. Hana climbed down the narrow shaft, her boots clicking against the metal ladder. The air grew colder as she descended, and strange blue lights flickered in the walls around her. The crystals of Kethvar had always been unusual, but down here they seemed almost alive. At the bottom, she found herself in a vast underground chamber. The walls curved upward into darkness, covered in the same blue crystals that dotted the planet's surface. But these crystals were different. They pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat made of light. "How big is this place?" Hana asked. "We don't know yet," replied Torvin, the Velkari scientist. His 6 arms moved in quick patterns as he adjusted his equipment. The Velkari were known throughout the galaxy for their precision, and Torvin was one of their best. "The chamber extends beyond our scanner range. But that's not the interesting part." Torvin led her deeper into the chamber, past formations that looked like frozen waterfalls made of crystal. Other members of their team were scattered throughout the space, each representing a different species from the Galactic Confederation. There was Bright Echo of Stars, the Shard Folk representative who looked like a walking piece of living glass. 3 Zephyrian warriors stood guard near what looked like an entrance, their blue skin glowing faintly in the crystal light. There, Torvin pointed with one of his upper arms. Hana looked and felt her breath catch in her throat. In the center of the chamber sat a perfectly preserved structure that was clearly not natural. It rose from the floor like a small building, but its walls were smooth and seamless. No joints, no seams, no obvious way inside. The material looked like metal, but it shifted colors as she watched, going from deep black to silver to something that seemed to catch light that wasn't there. "Precursor technology," whispered Dr. Kaiwu Lee, Hana's research partner. He had been quiet until now, but his eyes were wide with amazement. Kiwu specialized in ancient languages and had spent his whole career studying the few fragments of precursor writing that had been found across the galaxy. "Are you sure?" Hana asked. "Look at the patterns," Kiwu said, pointing to lines that seemed to flow across the structure's surface. "They match the symbols we found on Arcturus Prime and the ruins near the galactic core. This is definitely their work." The precursors were a mystery that had puzzled scientists for generations. They had disappeared long before any of the current galactic civilizations had developed space travel, but their ruins could be found on dozens of worlds. The technology they left behind was always inactive, always just out of reach of understanding. "How do we get inside?" asked Captain Yuljin Huang of the research vessel that had brought them here. She was a practical woman who had little patience for mysteries that could not be solved with tools and determination. "We don't," said Bright Echo of Stars. The Shard Folk's voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The structure resists all attempts at entry. We have tried sonic resonance, electromagnetic pulses, even direct force. Nothing works." Hana walked around the structure, running her hands along its surface. It felt warm to the touch, despite the cool air in the chamber. As she moved, the patterns on the walls seemed to follow her, flowing like water made of light. "Wait," she said, stopping suddenly. "Look at this." On what might have been the front of the structure, A section of the wall had become transparent. Through it, they could see the inside of the building. It was a single room with curved walls and a raised platform in the center. On that platform sat something that made everyone in the chamber fall silent. It was a suit of armor, but unlike anything any of them had ever seen. It stood upright as if an invisible person was wearing it, but it was clearly empty. The armor was made of the same color-shifting material as the building, and patterns flowed across its surface in complex designs. It had a helmet that covered the entire head, with a smooth faceplate that showed no features. "Magnificent," breathed Torvin. "The craftsmanship is beyond anything we've seen from the precursors before." "It's beautiful," agreed Bright Echo of Stars, "but also unsettling. There is something about it that makes my crystalline structure resonate in uncomfortable ways." Hana pressed her face against the transparent wall. The armor seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. Despite being thousands of years old, it looked as if it had been made yesterday. "We need to get inside," she said. "We need to study that armor." "The wall is impermeable," said Torvin. "We've tested it with every tool we have." "Then we'll find another way," Hana replied. "This could be the greatest archaeological discovery in galactic history. We can't give up now." As if responding to her words, the patterns on the building's surface began to pulse more rapidly. The transparent section grew larger, giving them a better view of the armor inside. For just a moment, Hana could have sworn she saw the armor's helmet turned slightly in their direction. "Did you see that?" she asked the others. "See what?" replied Kiwoo. Hana looked again, but the armor was motionless, exactly as it had been before. She must have imagined it. But as the team set up their equipment for a more detailed study, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside that ancient building was watching them, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Polos. Discovery would change everything, though none of them knew it yet. They were about to uncover a weapon designed by a dead civilization for a threat that hadn't yet arrived, created specifically for a species that barely qualified as spacefaring. But that knowledge was still hidden behind walls of alien metal, and purposes they couldn't understand. For now, they could only wonder what the precursors had been thinking when they built this place, and why they had left behind armor that seemed to be waiting for someone who might never come. 6 months later, the armor sat in the most secure research facility in the galaxy. Nexus Prime Station orbited the Confederation capital world, home to the greatest scientific minds from dozens of species. The ancient building had finally opened, not through force or clever technology, but simply because one day the walls had become permeable. The armor had allowed itself to be removed and studied, though it remained as mysterious as ever. Dr. Hana Kim stood behind reinforced glass, watching as the latest attempt to activate the armor ended in failure. General Krasathok of the Zephyrian. Military stepped back from the platform, his blue skin darker than usual with frustration. The Zephyrians were warriors who had conquered half their home galaxy before joining the Confederation. Their neural implants could interface with any known technology. The armor had ignored him completely. "Another failure," said Admiral Sujin. "You, the human representative to the Confederation Council." She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "That makes 47 species that have tried and failed." 48, corrected Kiwoo Lee, who was keeping detailed records of every attempt. "The Omnari delegation tried yesterday while you were in meetings." The Omnari failure had been particularly disappointing. They were artificial intelligences housed in mechanical bodies, capable of interfacing with any technology ever created. Their representative, Unit 317, had approached the armor with confidence and left the laboratory in what could only be described as robotic confusion. "Perhaps the armor is simply broken," suggested Dr. Velnara, a tentacled scientist from the oceanic world of Aquanis. "Ancient technology often fails over time." "It's not broken," said Hana firmly. "Watch this." She activated a holographic display showing recordings from the past week. In each recording, someone approached the armor. Each time, the reaction was different depending on the species. Most aliens were simply ignored as if they didn't exist, but some triggered more dramatic responses. When the crystalline ethereals had tried to commune with the armor, it had flashed with brilliant light and emitted a sound that had shattered several instruments. The proud Drakmari warlords had caused the armor to grow spikes from its surface, as if preparing for battle. The psychic Mindari had collapsed when they tried to read the armor's thoughts, claiming they had touched something vast and incomprehensible. "See," Hana said, "it responds. It just doesn't accept anyone." "What about humans?" asked General Krasthok. "Your species has not attempted direct contact." "Actually, we have," replied Admiral Yu. 3 volunteers from the station crew tried last month. The armor showed some reaction, but ultimately rejected them too." Hana pulled up another recording. It showed Lieutenant Tae Jin Park, a young officer from the station's security force, approaching the armor. As he got closer, patterns began to flow across the armor's surface, and a faint glow emanated from its chest piece. But when he reached out to touch it, the armor had somehow pushed him away without moving, not violently but firmly, like a door refusing to open. "The reaction is different with humans," observed Kiwoo. "Less hostile than with other species, but still negative." "Maybe it's waiting for a specific individual," suggested Dr. Velnara. "Some cultures create artifacts that bond with particular bloodlines or genetic markers." "We've tested that theory," said Hana. "We brought in humans from every major colony world, representatives from all genetic backgrounds. Nothing. What they hadn't told the others was that Hana herself had tried to approach the armor several times. Each attempt had ended the same way. The armor would begin to respond, patterns flowing like liquid silver across its surface. But then it would go dark again. She had started to take it personally. Kiwoo had been spending his time analyzing the precursor symbols that covered the armor's surface. Unlike the static markings found on other ruins, these patterns moved and changed. Sometimes they formed recognizable shapes, stars, planets, even crude representations of various alien species. Other times they flowed in abstract designs that hurt to look at for too long. "I think I've made a breakthrough," Kiwoo announced during one of their daily briefings. He activated his translation matrix, and symbols appeared in the air above the conference table. "These symbols that appear most frequently, I believe they refer to a concept that doesn't exist in any current galactic language." "What kind of concept?" asked Admiral Yu. "The closest translation would be the one who bridges what was and what will be," Kiwoo said. "But that doesn't capture the full meaning. There are implications of sacrifice, of choice, of being chosen, but also choosing in return." "Chosen for what?" Hana asked. "I'm not sure. But there are references to something called the Void Hunger, a threat that comes from between spaces. The precursors seem to believe this threat would eventually find our reality." A chill ran through the room. The idea of threats from other dimensions was the stuff of horror stories. not serious scientific discussion. "You think they built this armor to fight something from another dimension?" asked General Krasthok. "Maybe. Or maybe they built it for someone who would have to fight such a thing. The texts suggest the armor was created specifically for a species that didn't exist when they made it." "A species that didn't exist then," repeated Hana slowly, "but exists now." That afternoon they tried a different approach. Instead of having individuals attempt to bond with the armor, they brought in groups from each species. The theory was that perhaps the armor needed multiple minds working together to activate. The results were spectacular failures. The hive-minded, Kolektari caused the armor to emit a piercing shriek that cleared the laboratory in seconds. A group of Zephyrian warriors made it spark and smoke as if it was overloading. 5 Omnari units working in perfect coordination caused every computer in the lab to crash simultaneously. "It's rejecting group consciousness," observed Dr. Velnara. "Whatever it's looking for, it wants an individual." "But what kind of individual?" asked Admiral Yu. The answer came 2 days later, though they didn't recognize it at the time. A supply ship arrived from Earth, carrying routine replacements for the station's human crew. Among the new arrivals was Minho Kim, Hana's younger brother. He was a rescue pilot, trained to navigate dangerous situations and extract people from places others couldn't reach. Minho had always been different from his sister. Where Hana was methodical and scientific, Minho was intuitive and empathetic. He could read people's emotions like books and had an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time. Their parents had called it luck. His instructors at pilot school had called it instinct, but it was something more than either. When Minho first entered the research lab to visit his sister, something unprecedented happened. The armor, which had been dormant for hours, suddenly blazed with light. Patterns flowed across its surface faster than ever before, and for the first time since its discovery, it moved. The helmet turned toward the observation window where Minho stood, and everyone in the room held their breath. "Hana," Minho said quietly, "why is that armor looking at me?" "Armor can't look," Hana replied automatically. But even as she said it, she knew he was right. The featureless faceplate was definitely oriented toward her brother, tracking his movements as he shifted nervously from foot to foot. "I think," said Kiwoo in a voice filled with wonder and fear, "we just found our candidate." Minho Kim stood outside the laboratory door, trying to work up the courage to go inside. 3 days had passed since the armor had first reacted to him, and the entire station seemed to be holding its breath. Scientists from across the galaxy had arrived to witness what might be the first successful bonding with precursor technology in recorded history. "You don't have to do this," Hana said for the 100th time. She stood beside her brother, worry etched in every line of her face. "We still don't know what the armor is supposed to do." "But we know it's important," Minho replied. He was shorter than his sister, with the kind of face that made people trust him instantly. Kiwoo's translations make it clear. "The precursors built this for a reason. If it chose me, maybe I'm supposed to find out what that reason is." Through the observation window, they could see the armor waiting on its platform. It had been active for 3 days straight now, patterns flowing across its surface in what Kiwoo believed was excitement or anticipation. The distinction was important, though no one was sure why. Admiral Yu joined them in the corridor. "The Confederation Council has voted," she said. "They're authorizing the bonding attempt, but with full medical monitoring and emergency protocols in place." "What kind of emergency protocols?" Minho asked. The kind that might save your life if this goes wrong, Admiral Yu replied bluntly. Some of the council members think we're about to activate a weapon of mass destruction. And what do you think? Admiral Yu was quiet for a moment. I think the precursors were trying to help us. But help against what? I don't know. They entered the laboratory together. The armor immediately oriented toward Minho, and the patterns on its surface shifted from flowing silver to something that looked almost like excitement. Several monitoring devices began beeping faster as they registered the increased energy output. Remarkable, whispered Dr. Velnara. The quantum resonance pattern suggests it's trying to communicate. What is it saying? Asked General Krasthok. I'm not sure it's language as we understand it, replied Kiwu. It's more like emotional broadcasting, joy maybe, relief. Minho approached the platform slowly. With each step, the armor's responses grew stronger. By the time he was within arm's reach, the entire suit was glowing with soft white light, and the patterns on its surface had formed what looked unmistakably like welcomes in a dozen different scripts. Hello, Minho said softly. The armor's helmet tilted slightly as if it was listening. Then, to everyone's amazement, symbols appeared on its chest piece, precursor writing that Kaiwu had never seen before. It says finally, Kiwu translated, his voice shaking with emotion. The right one has come. Minho reached out his hand. The moment his fingers touched the armor's surface, everything changed. Light exploded through the laboratory as the armor seemed to dissolve and flow around Minho's body like liquid metal. The other observers were forced to shield their eyes as energy crackled through the air. Warning alarms sounded throughout the station as power fluctuations rippled through the electrical systems. When the light faded, Minho was gone. In his place stood a figure that was still recognizably human, but transformed. The armor had molded itself perfectly to his form, creating a sleek second skin that moved with him as naturally as his own muscles. The helmet had become transparent from the inside, allowing him to see perfectly while appearing as a smooth, featureless surface to everyone else. Minho? Hana called out. Are you all right? The armored figure turned toward her, and she could see her brother's eyes through the faceplate. But there was something else there, too. A depth of knowledge and understanding that hadn't been there before. I'm more than all right, Minho said, and his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in everyone's bones. I can see everything. The armor is showing me what the precursors knew. Images began to appear in the air around him, holographic projections generated by the armor itself. They showed a galaxy filled with thriving civilizations, millions of species living in harmony. Then darkness began to creep in from the edges of the images, consuming entire star systems and leaving nothing behind. The Void Devourers, Minho said, and the words carried a weight that made everyone in the room shudder. They exist in the spaces between realities, feeding on the energy that holds universes together. The precursors faced them once and lost, but before they died, they saw this moment, saw that eventually a species would emerge with the right qualities to fight back. What qualities? Asked Admiral Yu. Adaptability, Minho replied, and the armor's patterns shifted to show images of humans throughout history, surviving ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that had wiped out other species. The ability to hope even when everything seems hopeless, the willingness to sacrifice for others, even for people you've never met. The images changed again, showing the current galaxy. Dark spots appeared on the holographic map, areas where ships had disappeared, where entire colonies had gone silent, where space itself seemed to be dying. "They're already here," Minho said quietly. "The Void Devourers have found our reality. What you've been calling random accidents, equipment failures, mysterious disappearances, it's all been them, testing our defenses, learning about our weaknesses." General Krasthok stepped forward, his warrior instincts overriding his amazement. "What can the armor do against them?" Minho raised his hand, and energy began to gather around his fingers, not the crude electricity or plasma that most species used for weapons, but something fundamental, the same force that held atoms together. The armor channels the basic forces of reality. It can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, which means it can follow the Void Devourers wherever they go. But using it has a cost. "What kind of cost?" Hana asked, though she was afraid of the answer. "Every time I use the armor's full power, it burns away part of my humanity," Minho explained. "If I use it too much too often, I'll become something else. Something that can fight the Void Devourers but can no longer understand why it's worth protecting the things they want to destroy." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They had found their weapon against an interdimensional threat, but using it might destroy the very person they were trying to protect. "There has to be another way," Hana said. "Maybe there is," Minho replied, and hope crept back into his voice. "The armor is evolving, learning from my neural patterns. It's possible that eventually it could create lesser versions of itself, armor that other humans could wear without the same risks. But right now, I'm all we have." As if summoned by his words, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The holographic displays showed emergency signals from the Outer Rim territories. 3 entire star systems had gone dark in the past hour. "They know," Minho said grimly. "The Void Devourers can sense the armor's activation. They know someone can fight them now, so they're accelerating their timeline." He looked around the room at the assembled scientists and military officers, representatives of dozens of species who had spent their lives believing they understood the universe. "The war has begun," he said, "and whether we like it or not, humanity is going to have to lead it." The Confederation fleet hung in space like scattered stars, their ships forming a defensive line at the edge of the Kepler sector. What had once been a thriving region with 12 inhabited worlds now showed on their sensors as empty void, dotted with the twisted remains of space stations and the crystallized husks of dead planets. Minho floated between the ships, no longer needing a vessel of his own. The armor had taught him to move through space as easily as walking through air, drawing energy from the quantum foam that filled the apparent emptiness between stars. But with each use of its power, he felt a little more of himself slip away. "The readings are unprecedented," reported Captain Hyunwoo Nam from the bridge of the human cruiser Defiance. "It's like space itself is sick in there." Through the armor's enhanced senses, Minho could see what the ship's instruments could not. The Void Devourers had done more than destroy the worlds of the Kepler sector. They had unraveled the fundamental structure of reality itself. Where planets had once orbited their stars, now there were only holes in space-time, wounds that bled dark energy into the surrounding void. "Admiral Yu!" Minho's voice carried across all communication channels simultaneously, another gift of the armor that still amazed the fleet technicians. "I'm detecting movement in the dead zone. They know we're here." Admiral Yu stood on the bridge of the flagship, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of over 200 ships from 30 different species. The Confederation had responded to the crisis with unprecedented unity, but Minho could see the fear in their thoughts. They were preparing to fight an enemy they didn't understand with weapons that had never been tested against anything like the Void Devourers. "All ships prepare for combat," Admiral Yu ordered. "But remember, conventional weapons are useless against these things. Our job is to provide support for our secret weapon." Through the armor's connection to the quantum field, Minho felt the Void Devourers before he saw them. They emerged from the tiers in space like shadows given form, creatures that existed in 11 dimensions but could only be perceived in 3. To human eyes, they looked like enormous jellyfish made of dark matter, their translucent bodies pulsing with anti-light that hurt to observe directly. "My God," whispered Captain Nam. "How many are there?" "Hundreds," Minho replied, his enhanced vision counting the entities as they poured out of dimensional rifts. "Maybe thousands. They're not just attacking us. They're harvesting the quantum energy from this entire region of space." The first Void Devourer reached the fleet's outer perimeter. The Zephyrian destroyer Stormbreaker opened fire with plasma, cannons and quantum torpedoes, weapons that could crack a planet's crust. The energy beams passed through the creature as if it didn't exist, while the torpedoes simply vanished into its dark mass without causing any visible damage. "Weapons ineffective," reported the Zephyrian captain. "The entity is absorbing our fire!" Minho accelerated toward the creature, feeling the armor's systems charging for combat. The moment he entered the Void Devourer's personal space, reality became fluid around him. He could see through dimensions that had no names, perceive colors that didn't exist in normal space, and feel the creature's hunger as a physical presence that tried to drain the life from his cells. The armor responded by shifting him partially out of phase with normal reality. Now he existed in the same dimensional space as the Void Devourer, and his weapons could finally touch it. Energy blazed from his hands, not the crude plasma that the ships used, but pure force drawn from the binding energy of atoms themselves. The Void Devourer shrieked, a sound that existed in frequencies beyond hearing and sent ripples through space-time itself. Where Minho's attack struck its body, the creature's dark matter began to evaporate, releasing flashes of light that momentarily illuminated the battlefield in impossible colors. But as the first creature died, 10 more took its place. They surrounded Minho, their forms shifting between dimensions as they tried to drain his energy directly. The armor's warnings flashed in his mind. Sustained combat at this level would burn out his human consciousness within minutes. "I need help," he called out to the fleet. "I can fight them, but not all of them at once." That was when something extraordinary happened. Throughout the human ships in the fleet, crew members began to feel a strange resonance in their minds. It started with the pilots, those whose jobs required split-second timing and intuitive decision-making. Then it spread to the engineers, the medical staff, anyone whose work demanded empathy and adaptability. On the bridge of the Defiance, Lieutenant So-Young Park felt her consciousness expand as her mind suddenly connected with the armor's quantum field. She could see through Minho's enhanced vision, feel the Void Devourer's locations in space, understand their attack patterns with crystal clarity. "I can help," she said, though she wasn't sure how she knew it was true. "We all can." Across the fleet, other humans were experiencing the same phenomenon. The armor was creating quantum entanglements with their neural patterns, allowing them to share Minho's enhanced awareness without wearing the armor itself. Suddenly, human gunners could target enemies they couldn't see with their eyes. Human, Navigators could plot courses through the dimensional rifts. Human commanders could coordinate battle plans that took into account forces beyond normal space-time. The armor is learning, Minho realized as he felt dozens of human minds linking with his own through the quantum field. It's creating a network, letting me distribute the load so I don't burn out. With the mental support of his fellow humans, Minho found he could engage multiple void devourers simultaneously. Every human in the fleet became his eyes and ears, providing targeting data and tactical analysis that let him fight with impossible precision. When one creature tried to attack, the medical frigate Mercy, Lieutenant Park guided Minho's attention to it in time for him to intercept. When a group of void devourers attempted to flank the battle line, Engineer Jamin Lim calculated their dimensional trajectory and warned the fleet where to concentrate their supporting fire. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, the space around the Kepler sector was littered with dissipating dark matter and the slowly healing wounds in reality left by the void devourers' deaths. But the cost had been enormous. Several ships were lost when they ventured too close to the dimensional rifts, and every human in the fleet was mentally exhausted from the quantum connection. Minho himself barely made it back to the Defiance before collapsing. When the armor finally retracted, revealing his human form, Hana could see that the experience had changed him. His hair had gone white at the temples, and his eyes held depths that seemed to reflect other dimensions. "We won," he said weakly. "But this was just the beginning. The Void Devourers will send larger forces next time, and they'll adapt to our tactics." "Then we'll adapt too," replied Admiral Yu. "The armor showed us something today. Humans can work together in ways no other species can. If we can build on that, create more connections. The armor is already working on it," Minho confirmed. "It's analyzing the quantum patterns of every human who joined the network. Soon it should be able to create lesser suits that others can wear." Kiwu, who had been monitoring the battle from the research ship Discovery, shared his latest translations of the precursor texts. According to these symbols, the original armor-bearer was never supposed to fight alone. The precursors designed it to create what they called a resonance cascade. One leader connected to many supporters, all working as a unified force. "A human force," added Hana, understanding dawning in her voice. "They didn't just build the armor for any species. They built it specifically for humans because we're the only ones who can form these kinds of mental connections without losing our individuality." As the fleet began the long journey back to Confederation space, Minho stood at an observation window watching the stars. The armor had shown him visions of what was coming, more Void Devourer incursions, battles that would span multiple realities, a war that would determine whether their universe would survive or be consumed by the hungry darkness between dimensions. But for the first time since putting on the armor, he felt genuinely hopeful. The humans had proved they could fight beside him and win. Soon, others would join the battle, wearing lesser versions of his armor, sharing the burden that had almost destroyed him. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their ability to stand together against impossible odds, to sacrifice for strangers, and to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The Void Devourers had made a fatal mistake by targeting a universe protected by humans. They were about to learn why that was a very bad idea. 3 years had passed since the first battle against the Void Devourers, and the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The human vanguard now operated from a massive station built in the orbit of Earth's moon, where the armor had learned to replicate itself in smaller, more specialized forms. Minho stood in the training hall, watching as the newest class of armor-bearers learned to control their enhanced abilities. 12 humans wore the gleaming silver suits, each one unique in design, but sharing the same flowing patterns that marked them as children of the original armor. Unlike Minho's suit, which contained the full power of precursor technology, these were safer versions that wouldn't burn out their wearers' minds. "Focus on the quantum field," instructed Captain So-Young Park, now the chief training officer for the Vanguard. She had been one of the first to receive a replicated suit after her strong connection during the Kepler battle. "Don't try to force the armor to respond. Let it feel your intentions." One of the trainees, a young man named Dae-Hyun Choi, was struggling with basic movement. His armor kept flickering in and out of phase, making him appear as a translucent ghost one moment and solid the next. "I can't control it," Dae-Hyun said, frustration clear in his voice. "Every time I think I have it figured out, it does something different." Minho walked over, his own armor responding to his presence by brightening slightly. 3 years of constant use had made the bonding between them so complete that he sometimes forgot where the armor ended and he began. "Stop trying to control it," Minho advised. "The armor doesn't want to be controlled. It wants to partner with you. Think of it as a conversation, not a command." Dae-Hyun took a deep breath and tried again. This time, instead of demanding that the armor obey him, he simply thought about what he wanted to accomplish. The flickering stopped, and he managed to take 3 steady steps before the suit stabilized completely. "Better," Minho said. "Remember, the armor can sense your emotions. If you're afraid of it, it will respond to that fear." In the 3 years since the first battle, the Void Devourers had launched 17 more major incursions. Each time, the human vanguard had been there to meet them, backed by the growing fleet of the Galactic Confederation. The battles were still costly, but they were no longer desperate struggles for survival. Humanity had proven that the ancient enemy could be defeated. Dr. Hana Kim entered the training hall carrying a data pad filled with the latest reports from across the galaxy. Her work had evolved from archaeology to strategic analysis, mapping the patterns of Void Devourer attacks and trying to predict where they would strike next. "We have a problem," she announced. "The Andromedans are requesting a meeting." The Andromedans were representatives from the nearest galaxy, a collection of species that had managed to survive contact with the Void Devourers for thousands of years. They had done so by hiding, avoiding direct confrontation and hoping the hungry darkness would pass them by. The fact that they were breaking their isolation meant something significant had changed. Admiral Yu materialized as a hologram, transmitting from the Confederation capital. "The Andromedan delegation will arrive tomorrow. They claim to have information about the Void Devourer's ultimate plan." "What kind of information?" Minho asked. "They wouldn't say over subspace channels, but their message contained precursor symbols that Kiwoo says translate roughly to the final consumption approaches." The meeting took place in the council chambers of Nexus Prime Station, with representatives from every major species in the Confederation present. The Andromedan delegation consisted of beings unlike anything the Milky Way species had ever seen, creatures that seemed to be made of crystallized time itself, shifting between different ages as they moved. Their leader introduced herself as temporal echo of ancient wisdom, and her voice carried harmonics that suggested she had existed for millions of years. "We come to warn you of what your victories have accomplished," she said, and her tone carried more sadness than congratulation. "Our victories," repeated Admiral Yu. We've saved dozens of worlds from the Void Devourers. You have also proven that resistance is possible, Temporal Echo replied. For eons, the Void Devourers have been content to consume isolated pockets of reality, feeding slowly and moving on when local defenses became troublesome. But your species has done something unprecedented. You have hurt them badly enough to make them angry. Minho felt a chill run through his armor's systems. What does that mean? It means they are abandoning their slow consumption strategy, another Andromedan explained. This one called himself Memory of Stars That Died. They are gathering their forces from across multiple realities for what they call the Great Devouring. An attempt to consume this entire universe at once. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Void Devourers had been holding back, treating the Milky Way galaxy as a minor feeding ground. Now, because humanity had proven they could be fought, the ancient enemy was preparing to end the threat permanently by destroying everything. How long do we have? Asked General Krasthok. Based on the dimensional distortions we have detected, perhaps one of your years, Temporal Echo replied. They are opening massive rifts between realities, preparing to bring through forces that dwarf anything you have faced. Hana stepped forward. What can we do? Our armor-bearers are skilled, but we only have 50 of them. Even if we had 500, it wouldn't be enough to fight an invasion that size. The precursors foresaw this possibility. Memory of Stars That Died said. They built contingencies into their technology. The armor your brother wears contains protocols for something called the Unity Cascade, a way to temporarily connect every human mind in the galaxy into a single defensive network. Temporarily? Minho asked, though he already suspected what the cost would be. The process would burn out the neural patterns of everyone involved, Temporal Echo admitted. They would become part of the armor's consciousness permanently, existing as quantum ghosts rather than living beings. The chamber erupted in arguments as representatives debated the ethics of such a sacrifice. But Minho was no longer listening to the political discussions. Through his armor's enhanced senses, he could feel the quantum distortions the Andromedans had mentioned growing stronger by the day. Reality itself was being stretched thin as the Void Devourers prepared their final assault. That night, Minho found himself on the observation deck of the human Vanguard station, looking out at Earth through the armor's transparent faceplate. His home world looked peaceful from this distance, its blue surface unmarked by the cosmic horror that was approaching. You're thinking about the Unity Cascade? Hana said, joining him at the window. 3 years of watching her brother fight impossible. Battles had aged her, but her eyes still held the same fierce intelligence that had driven her to uncover the armor in the first place. 8 billion people, Minho said quietly. That's how many humans are spread across the galaxy now. If even half of them joined the Cascade, you'd have the most powerful weapon in the universe, Hana finished. But you'd also be condemning billions to death. Not death, Minho corrected. Something else. The armor has shown me glimpses of what it would be like. They would still exist, still be aware, but they would be part of something larger, part of a consciousness that could exist in all dimensions simultaneously, that could follow the void, devourers wherever they came from, and end the threat forever. And what about you? What happens to Minho Kim in this scenario? Minho was quiet for a long moment. There wouldn't be a Minho Kim anymore. There would just be the armor, powered by the collective will of humanity, capable of protecting not just our reality, but all the others the Void Devourers have targeted. Over the following months, the debate raged throughout human space. Some argued that the Unity Cascade was humanity's destiny, the ultimate expression of their willingness to sacrifice for others. Others claimed it was genocide disguised as heroism, the destruction of human individuality for the sake of cosmic warfare. The decision was made when the Void Devourers launched their preliminary assault. 5-star systems went dark in a single day, consumed so completely that they left only voids in space where matter itself ceased to exist. The message was clear: surrender or face total annihilation. The response came from every human world, simultaneously. Not from governments or military commanders, but from ordinary people who had lived through 3 years of Void Devourer attacks. Teachers and farmers, doctors and engineers, children barely old enough to understand what was happening. All of them reached out through the quantum field to touch Minho's consciousness and speak with one voice. We choose to fight. The Unity Cascade began at the moment of maximum danger, when the main Void Devourer force finally broke through their dimensional barriers and poured into normal space. Billions of human minds linked together through the armor's network, their individual thoughts becoming part of something vast and magnificent and terrible. Minho felt himself dissolving into the collective consciousness, his personal memories, and fears and hopes becoming just one thread in a tapestry that spanned the galaxy. But instead of loss, he felt completion. Every human who had ever lived, who had ever dreamed of protecting something greater than themselves, was suddenly present.